Thank you so much all for joining us for the book launch for Ericka Verzutti, New Moons. I'm Nicole Kack. I'm the editorial program manager at ISLAA, which is an organization dedicated to the study and visibility of Latin American art. I wanted to first start off by thanking Ericka so much for traveling so far to be with us here tonight. She is such a wonderful artist and so central to our program. And we're so glad to have been able to collaborate with CCS Bard and Dancing Foxes Press on this publication. I also wanted to say a special thanks to Andrew Krepp's Gallery for supporting this event tonight. Before getting the program started, I also want to say a special thank you to Lauren Cornell and to Karen Kelly and Barbara Schroeder, who were such wonderful collaborators on this publication. We obviously couldn't have done it without you. And thank you so much for involving us and bringing us into this project. And just a quick reminder of the order of events. We're going to have a brief introduction by Lauren Cornell, followed by a reading by Ericka, and then short remarks by Ruba, Katrib, and then Bernardo, Mosqueira. Thanks so much all for joining us tonight, and I'll hand it off to Lauren.
So I want to do a few thank yous too. I want to start by thanking Karen Kelly and Barbara Schroeder, Dancing Foxes, prolific art book publishers who always ensure that artists' ideas make the book. And this was certainly the case with New Moons, which is on the back table, which was a process that was really creatively led by Ericka and the designer, Giulio Ferrarella. My Zoom presence was very quiet and deferential most of the time. And I also want to thank ISLAA, particularly Ariel Isaacs, Lucy Hunter, and Nicole Kack for co-publishing this book, and separately for their ongoing and super meaningful support of CCS. So they've partnered with the CCS Bard graduate program for several years, and thanks to them, we've been able to really deepen and expand our scholarship on Latin American art and artists. I consider myself an early booster of ISLAA, and I'm super happy to be here to celebrate this book, this new narrative on a Latin American artist in this amazing new space. So when we started this project, which is the first survey of Ericka's work in the US and an accompanying book, Ericka suggested, you might not remember this, but that we sort of cite everything through a prism of CCS. And I took that to mean that because Ericka is an artist with a lot of shows going on, that what makes each of those projects distinct is to really amplify the people and the set of circumstances in each place. And so that led us to inviting two alum of the program, Ruba and Bernardo. Ruba had organized Ericka's first show in the US, I think in 2015, when you were at Sculpture Center. And Bernardo had a long dedication to Ericka's practice and had written about her before and talked to me about really experiencing Ericka's influence in Brazil firsthand. So we assembled this team that had been talking to each other and talking about Ericka's work for a while and was deeply rooted at CCS. Separately, for the exhibition, Ericka and I talked about, how can we make this show distinct within other projects that she'd done. CCS's mission is to think about the form of exhibitions, exhibition histories, and so we wanted to think about a different presentation of her work that would sort of evolve it and reflect key aspects of it. And that's what led us to what you'll see. She'll show you a few images of it, but basically this design, which was what I call a parade, this kind of really long and wide strip of artworks that ran down all of the galleries. And that one long strip contained really the bulk of the show. The main survey of her work, drawn from 15 years of practice, but installed really intuitively. So to me, the term parade, evokes movement and irreverence and exuberance, and that felt like the right spirit for this presentation of her work, which was really totally untethered to chronology and really not about highlighting any specific work, but really about having a kind of joyous inclusivity and trying to capture some key aspects to her work. And those are the focus of my essay, which I'll speak about. So a few key aspects. One, this kind of consistent mixed up use of materials. So I don't know how many images of her work we'll see tonight, but for instance, Rubisco, which is a bronze sort of rabbit-like head with big ears sinking into a pile of clay. Another aspect is the removal of any clear categories or boundaries between body and material, between time periods, life forms, and art. And instead of focusing on categories, she really highlights a kind of, or her work really highlights a kind of porousness, or sort of like interspecies drift. And in the case of art, those sort of themes apply. The work often looks at kind of the thefts and counter thefts as sort of moving art history forward. And a last aspect that sort of was highlighted in this presentation was that she is in every work in some way. You can see the trace of her fingertips on almost every sculpture and relief. And I think that sort of, takes her work, moves it past like a thought that she's just referencing or that it's about quotation, and moves it into a space of seeing it as about transference and projection and personification. The exhibition started with a huge papier-mâché wall relief that had brass sort of half-moons inset into it, and it was titled The Crisis of Sculpture. And I think a sort of final aspect that I was thinking of when we were organizing this show is how there is a kind of productive crisis that runs through all of her work, a kind of crisis about being a singular being, being a standalone object, and you really see that because all of her objects are so sort of hybrid and interconnected. So my essay for the catalog looked at this approach that I'm describing, and it looked at it also through the perspective of moon watching. The show is also called New Moons, and moons and celestial objects are a kind of recurrent theme in her work. And she once said sort of offhand to me that in her work there was a kind of loss of gravity or a loss of sort of oppositional forces. So I chart the moon's role. I look at it sort of as a kind of hackneyed trope or muse in film and poetry, as a kind of site of conquest and a potential sort of commercialized destination. But then also through Clarice Lispector, I look at the moon as a witness. And here's a quote from Lispector from 1965. She writes, "That moonlight, think about it, paler than a corpse's face, so silent and far away. That moonlight witnessed the cries of the first monsters to walk the earth, surveyed the peaceful waters after the deluges and floods, illuminated centuries of nights, and went out at dawn throughout centuries. Think about it, my friend. That moonlight will be the same tranquil ghost when the last traces of your great-granddaughters no longer exist." So in the essay, I traced this kind of planetary thinking, sort of how a zoomed-out perspective can provide a new way to understand ourselves in relation to others. And I looked at that through scholars and also through Ericka's work, which I feel is often described as playful and even funny, but I also find super profound, particularly in thinking about these kinds of interrelationships and getting outside of set systems of being. So that's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I'm not going to even talk about the show. It was a dream, an absolute dream. And there are so many things I could say about the book, which was also like kind of ideal situation to make a book. And I just highly recommend the book and the texts, because this time I really love the texts. I'm a little bit like crazy about them. And this is the first time that I had this strange idea to write something. And I know now more than ever that I'm not a writer. It's the hardest thing in the world. But I had some stories to tell. So I thought it would be a good thing to have like some trivia lists about some works. So I'm going to read, and I'm very excited about this. Let's see how it goes. 3 stories, kind of 3 short stories. They have more or less 3 minutes each, so that you know where you are. And I think we can see, Nicole is going to show like the image of the work I'm talking about so that we're not totally lost. So, yeah. Saramandaya. Saramandaya from 2006 is my first bronze sculpture. It was named after a soap opera that aired in Brazil in 1976. I wasn't allowed to watch it as it was prohibited to minors. At the time, all TV programs started with a screen that showed a hand-signed document titled Censura Federal, Federal Censorship, which stated the program's age allowance. I grew up seeing that screen, not realizing that Brazil lived under military dictatorship. With strict control over all media, many television shows were censored or banned, and artists and writers were imprisoned and tortured or exiled. The soap opera Saramandaya used satire and surrealism to criticize society without risking censorship. For example, a corrupt farmer was ridiculed in a famous scene where an army of ants started coming out of his nose. There was also Dona Redonda, roughly Mrs. Round, a beloved character who loved food so much that she exploded the last episode. This grotesque scene, one of the most iconic moments in Brazilian television history, seemed to me now as a good theatrical critique of consumerism. Such vivid scenes taught me that absurdities were possible. And that was my mood when I created my first bronze sculpture. I felt urged to make all sculptures, all formats, all genres. I was as ravenous as Dona Redonda. As a shape, my Saramandaya started as a bulky silhouette intended to contain all my ideas. In fact, Saramandaya was conceived as the vase from which all the world's sculptures would blossom. I see that work now as if it were something I made as a child, clumsy shapes with so much belief in them. I just kept modeling, incorporating elements like angel wings, a female torso, tropical vegetation, something that resembles a periscope, flowers, a pine tree / popsicle, 2 geometric braces mimicking a Henry Moore sculpture, an ostrich. It was all confident and arbitrary. I also like the fact that the figures don't respect scale. The bird is a giant monster in relation to the human figure. I'm happy to have started from absurdity. So this was Saramandaya, the first story. The second one is homeopatia. We have these negative images in the book. There was like a brilliant play with the design. So we see this kind of X-ray of sorts of the work. And here I wanted to bring this to make a shift when we hear about them. So the next one is homeopatia. That is homeopathy in Portuguese. For the 2018 exhibition, Ex-Gurus, at Andrew Krapp's gallery in New York, I explored abstract representations of philosophical concepts. I was presenting works themed on belief systems that I had moved away from, such as astrology, Bach flowers remedies, Baptist church, and homeopathy. The last relief I made for the show was homeopathy, composed simply of rows of carved marks as if different colors different colored homeopathic substances had been scooped out of nature. I used a metal art cutting tool like an ice cream scoop. It felt as if I were creating a coloring book for myself with predetermined shapes and infinite color possibilities. Homeopatia Mondrian was created 2 years after Homeopatia on an aluminum casting using the template of Homeopatia. So in Homeopatia, this one, the background color is the golden shade of naked bronze without any patina, which unifies high contrast colors that would otherwise be difficult to combine. Then in Homeopatia Mondrian, there is that one. Homeopatia Mondrian stems from an opposite process. I covered the entire aluminum surface in different shades of white to neutralize the visual coldness of the aluminum and create a quirky blank canvas. The white field seemed to bring out the grid structure of the work. What instantly reminded me of Mondrian, the father of all grids. Mondrian's canvases are often referred to as clean or flat, but when I had the chance to see them in person, I was absorbed by the flash of the paint and the small cracks that give body to the surface. I wanted to have some of that creamy substance for my background too, so I chose cold and warm whites, 4 whites in all. When the time came to fill the oval slots with color, it felt reassuring to start from predetermined hues that we know by heart from Mondrian: red, blue, yellow, and black, which I soon tempered with some beiges and some lavender. This was during the pandemic lockdown, and I was painting at home and spending time choosing which color would go in which nest, and that made me feel somewhat purposeful and somehow protected. Colors have their own intricate dynamics. So while the grid structure appeared simplistic, the colors refused to be confined to their designated spaces. At one point, they rebelled and ventured horizontally, swimming on top of the white surface. Third story. Four outlines carved on clay gave me 4 flat shapes. They were trapezoids with smooth corners, as if they had rolled in time like pebbles. My ambition was for them to be torn pieces of newspaper flying in the wind. I left these plates inside the shapes flat and smooth to paint later. I like to give myself tasks that are physically satisfying. I painted the predetermined slices in a very light gray that appears to be white, because real white has too much contrast for the eye. I waited for them to dry so I could paint newspaper lettering on top to resemble a page of the news. The insertion of lettering came from the desire to make my artwork permeable to what is happening in real life. And this was especially true during the abhorrent political period when Bolsonaro was Brazil's president from 2019 to 2022. Initially, the works were quite literal. The first, A Era da Inocência Acabou, The Age of Innocence is Over, was based on the front page of Folha de São Paulo, Brazil's largest daily paper. I copied its original lettering and invented a headline that read, "Impeachment and Vaccine, Sunday, 26th of July, 2020. On top of that, I painted a cubist drawing fragment. I felt I needed to resort to the cubists, to their paintings of collaged pages, to help in my quest to connect art and bad news. Later that year, I was in London painting the tiny stock market ciphers of the Financial Times with the thinnest brush, number 0. The title of that work suggests a character in crisis. The title is Lady with Newspaper and Coins Crying. Finger marks serve as the hair, clothing, hands, and perhaps even tears of a woman in profile. It was September 2020, and there was not yet a vaccine for COVID-19. I painted an article announcing Christmas to be anticipated as an example of the dismantling of social structures. The Financial Times title dissipated into a cubist-style drawing. In the pieces that followed, references to the news became more abstract, as lines blur and disconnected brush strokes take over. Yet the perception of printed matter is still there, floating behind, conveying both beauty and anxiety. White out, there is the title of this work, stands for liquid paper, the old school correction fluid for typewritten text. Here it feels as if the news had been covered over, erased in the manner of Orwell's 1984, or in today's fake news galore, wiped away to the point of abstraction. That's that.
Well, first of all, thank you all for being here. It's amazing to have you here. Thank you also for being here with us, and Ericka for having traveled so far. And thank you, Lauren, for inviting me to be part of this publication. I have to actually change one information that I never wrote a large text about Ericka, and this is important because in a way I feel that I have been writing this text for maybe 10 years or 12 years. I wrote like small paragraphs or two in different books or texts, but I always waited for this moment that I would write about Ericka, and I feel that many of the ideas that are in this text have been in the make for many years. I remember that the first time I got in contact with Ericka's work was a very funny situation in a way. Pablo Leon de la Barra was doing a show at the Carmen Miranda Museum. Do you remember that? I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
And something happened that the works didn't get there in time, and Pablo decided to get a eggplant and a few sticks and put them together and say that this was Ericka's work in the show for the opening, and then the works got there later. And I feel that this situation made me think a lot about the work of the curator.
Yeah, that's a good example.
And I'm mentioning that also because, in a way, the text that I developed for this publication was so much about. I feel that in a way I had two responsibilities. I felt that I had two commitments or two responsibilities writing this text. One of them was with all the works that I have been meeting throughout the years by Ericka and all the conversations that I have been having with them. And another one was with CCS Board, the CCS students at that moment and in the future. I had graduated from CCS maybe 1 or 2 years only before the moment that you invited me to write this text. So I also felt that it was a good opportunity to, in a way, go back to that experience of living upstate, thinking about curatorial practice constantly, and this experience of going to a museum every day, going to the same museum every day to think about curatorial practice. And I learned so much from Ericka's works throughout the years about how can we learn from the objects, how these objects transform our bodies, our ways of seeing, of feeling, and imagining that I felt that it could be a good opportunity to combine these two things. I remember that throughout the years I was living in Rio, and Ericka was showing more internationally and in São Paulo than in Rio. So I was always like bumping into Ericka's works in curious situations, but there are some shows that really shaped how I ended up developing my own work. I remember this show called Missionary. In 2011, one of the most erotic shows I've ever seen, and it was just a number of sculptures, basically having sex in a beautiful way, very like tense and delicious. And in 2012, I went to São Paulo for some reason, and I saw your retrospective, which is interesting to think about a retrospective in 2012. And at that show, I saw the peacock. And I had this encounter with the peacock in a way that I think only few objects in life we have this kind of like very intense conversation between you and this piece. You don't know what's happening there, but you know that there's something special about this encounter. And I spent so much time trying to think about what was happening in this encounter. And I tried to have the same conversation with the gigantic turtle in Venice, and with the crooked cat in Venice at the back, and with Ouro Branco at the biennial. And I spent so much time trying to think about what they were telling me, and then I understood that the issue was more to think about how they were communicating. And in a way, what I wanted to talk about in this text was precisely about how these works, they present to us in a way that they are never going to give them completely. They are offering their dimensions that are graspable, but also their dimensions that are ungraspable. In a way, they are presenting always in a way that is very demanding their place of opacity. I think that your works and this show works plays with that really beautifully. Manipulates our bodies. We're constantly like trying to understand what's happening. We're getting closer. We're getting back. Some of them literally invite us to walk over them or walk around them, and in a way, I feel that all these elements about your work make me feel that they are alive, that they are not only vibrant, but they are literally alive. They are dancing, they are speaking really loud, and I wanted to highlight in this text, thinking about this text for these students at CCS now and in the future. I wanted to propose this exercise to approach your works, and from your works, other works, understanding that they have memory, that they have agency, that they have desire, that they are literally alive, and what can we learn from that? It was very beautiful to go back to CCS, this place that when I moved to the US, I encountered this gigantic mural saying exile is a hard job, right? And I was like, yeah, I should have. What's that? Exile is a hard place. Job. It's a job, right? Job. Hi, Tom. Yeah, I think so. And I was like, okay, I should have learned that at that moment. And at that moment, what I was experiencing was the sensation of getting to a place that you don't recognize anything and that nothing recognizes you back. And 4 or 5 years later, I came to CCS to see Ericka's show, in your show, and I re-encountered the peacock. And I had the experience to recognize the peacock and to understand that the peacock was also recognizing me back at the end of this parade. And we had the best conversation. And in a way, you mentioned Lauren Clarice Lispector, which one of my favorite writers. My very first show had a quote by Clarice as the title of the exhibition, and that in a way I think translates a lot the kind of vibration that I feel that Ericka's works present to us. Which is, as the quote says, freedom is not enough, where our desire has yet no name. So there is this kind of very, at the same time, existentialist, but also punk, in a way, approach that I find very um, compelling in that situation. I love that you brought Saramandaya and what's her name? Dona Redonda. It's really like something so imprinted in our Brazilian imaginary. But I love that you brought that because I think that what you do and your work really does as a process is to eat everything. Eat everything. It doesn't matter if it's Picasso, if it's Bolsonaro, if it's a meme, if it's art history or the most vernacular thing. And I love that a little bit later you brought Bolsonaro and the impeachment and the Cubist impeachment, both are impeachment, but also in like kind of a pizza, right? Ready to be devoured. And this, I find that it's quite generous to offer your work as something that you already digested, but is already offered to be digested by all of us. And yeah, I think that I probably spoke for 5 minutes already. Sorry, but that's it.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Also very happy to be here. Thank you, Lauren, also for inviting me to be a part of this book. And it marked my third time writing on Ericka, so I've really had the pleasure of digging into her work. For the first time for the show that I organized at Sculpture Center in 2015, which was a text that was sort of a short overview of her work and like looking at the taxonomies of her forms, exactly this kind of sort of complex cast of characters that she brings together. And then the second time from her show at MASPI in 2021, which was focused more on the role of the swan in her work. And so this was a central part of the show at Sculpture Center, which is a moment in which Ericka did write something, because she wrote a script for, don't forget, for this piece that was quite incredible. And I didn't have the ability to digest that in the text I wrote for Sculpture Center because it hadn't happened yet. So being able to reflect upon that was really great. And I'll talk about that a little bit more, but there was, a performance and a swan
Ruba
scaled
is
up.
the only person who wrote about my performance work. And it's quite a special text. I'm happy it exists. Thank you.
Thank you for also the invitation to write for that book. And for this text, I was thinking a little bit more deeply about Ericka's art historical references, but also her materials as well. So the text focuses a little bit more on her slippage between what's found and what's made. Ericka has this kind of uncanny way of, making a sculpture of a rock, but then making another sculpture, let's say, of a poodle made out of actual rock. So you're never really sure like what is real and what is made. And in this text, I kind of dug a little bit more into like her tools entering into that conversation. So again, like everything is available to Ericka, and she makes good use of it. So and I also was thinking a lot about like some key references, because I was actually reading a lot of Thomas Crow at the time, and I was thinking about how Ericka's referencing some interesting artists, I think at like American mid-century artists like Jasper Johns, which she has a work where, what is it called again? It's called Jaspera na Escola.
Jaspera na escola.
Yes.
That is Jaspera, this character,
Which is
at school.
at school, which is like you. So Ericka is in all of her works, not only through her hand, but as like a kind of character of the artist that I think is really quite humorous at times, but also really, ties into an artist like Jasper Johns or Rauschenberger, artists who were responding in the mid-century in the US to kind of like folk art, and thinking through how artists either kind of push against that kind of like folk like creation to do something kind of radically different and avant-garde, or like the avant-garde is actually to take that and use it. So her use of newspapers, of art materials, you know, the sculpture that, sorry, it was a horrible little printout because I haven't actually seen the book until until today, which is quite beautiful. You know, of course, Jasper Johns painted bronze, where he makes a sculpture of a bronze sculpture of his paint can. And then Ericka's version, which I guess is not, okay, it's not in here. It's probably somewhere else in there. She's actually putting paintbrushes in to this work and redoing it. And then, you know, thinking through how she's bringing in these references, the everyday, absorbing it, digesting it, putting it out. But it's so much about the labor and the work of being an artist. And there were some fun things I just wanted to point out that I had fun writing, which was just, you know, one thing I wrote, which is that while the representation of the tool representing itself in her sculpture seems straightforward, how it completes the image or thing she's representing feels unexpected, like the scalpel the surgeon forgot to remove from the body of a patient. And I feel like that's really apropos, where you know, it's like she just finished the work and like dumped everything that she used to make the work into the work. So it's very much in line with something that she has said, which is she's making sculptures out of old sculptures. So this idea of like reuse, nothing wasted is really critical. And so, you know, I think this is really, I think, a key aspect of how she's thinking of combining materials, making works whose materials actually like don't really make sense together. Like this one work that I talk about, Dinosaur with Helmet, which was in the Venice Biennale in 2017, which was a bronze sculpture that was outside of one of her forms of like suggesting an animal. And the helmet were sticks stuck in his head like a crown with pieces of paper that were drawn on, laminated, and this kind of like idea of laminating a piece of paper and sticking it into a bronze sculpture to, you know, be outside for several months throughout the summer into the fall. It's just so, I think, just exemplifies that kind of humor, that material humor, that narrative humor that Ericka brings to her work, which is that this, like, you know, this fragile dinosaur helmet exemplifies. And then, you know, I also talk a lot about newspapers in my text, which is another key material for Ericka, which she also has just talked about a little bit. And, you know, the newspaper as like a surface, but also something that extends out of her work with paper mache. So she was working with paper mache, you know, making these sculptures, but then kind of revealing the newspaper and what it says on it and the text. And, you know, the newspaper played a really key role in the Swan with Stage piece at Sculpture Center that I just want to kind of describe because it was fantastic to work on that. So a sort of giant scaled up swan form that Ericka has used in several works, a recurring form, with a platform on it. And so she'd actually done this piece for a show at Pivo in Sao Paulo. And there was a young guy, what is his name? How can I forget? Vinny, of course. Vinny, who she did performances with on the stage, and she photographed him with the swan and all these different sort of scenes. And those photographs were in the exhibition. And then for this show at Sculpture Center, Vinny was supposed to come and perform this. But when he got to customs, he said he was coming to New York for a performance, which you can't do without a visa. So then we had to scramble and find a new actor, which we did, and Ericka did like a casting call with these different actors, booked one, and then he played this role of like the artist. So he gives this monologue on the stage with the swan, talking to the swan, talking about the process of making the swan. And, you know, it's clear that this person is playing Ericka, but also somebody else too. You know, it's sort of unclear, but also clear. And then he says, I'm just going to read something that he says in the monologue, which is that, and he's playing the artist, we are talking about materials here. We're talking about masking tape, politics, and love, pretty much. And then he starts talking about the different newspapers, which are the best materials. And he prefers Folha de Sao Paulo because it's very light and dissolves quickly. Now I'm writing this, he doesn't say this. While stating that a paper like O Estado is too heavy and hard to digest. Veja is couché paper and useless. So the ubiquity of the newspaper is no longer random, but one that takes on particular characteristics. So I think this is also very key in Ericka's work, which is like these forms that she makes can seem so straightforward and simple, but of course, you know, the entire process of how they're made, like what they're made of, the stories behind them, even the kinds of newspapers she's using have such a strong specificity. And I think, you know, it's a joy to dig into that a little bit more in this text as well. So thank you.
And I think we have time for 1 to 2 questions. We're trying to keep it short, have a mix and mingle reception afterwards. But if you have a burning desire, say the word now. No? Okay. Well, yeah. Did you want to ask something too?
I just want to share one
Yeah.
anecdote. First, I loved hearing those remarks, which mixed anecdotes in with what you wrote about in your beautiful texts. And I just want to say that anytime I would disagree with Ericka about the book, you threw down the strongest card, which is that it needs to be this way because I'm going to the grave with this book. And there's just nothing you can argue with at that point because you're going to the grave with it, me maybe less so. So I just want to say I really hope you're happy. You obviously have inspired all of us so much. And I hope you all enjoy the book. So thank you so much.